Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm going to talk about dClimate, what our premise is, why it's needed, and what are some of the things we are building to make a difference in the ReFi ecosystem. So, dClimate was actually birthed out of the first venture that we started, which was parametric insurance. And the idea was that when you do something like parametric insurance, you need a lot of climate data. And so dClimate came out of that effort, and as a separate entity, it is a transparent, decentralized marketplace and ecosystem to shine a light on the climate information space. We found that just like with insurance, the climate space was full of opaque structures, opaque entities, and it was difficult to make sense of the huge amounts of data and convert it to actionable intelligence in an affordable way, in a transparent way. And so that's the problem that dClimate was built to solve. These problems in climate data span many issues. There's large gaps. A lot of the world actually doesn't even have basic weather data, let alone data on soil, carbon, and all the different things we need to understand our biosphere. There is, lack of technical standards that cross different data sets. If you look at these data sets, they all have very different ways they are stored and downloaded, and it takes a lot of work, and generally a specialized team to even work with the standard big public data sets, let alone some of the more computationally heavy niche data sets. There's no marketplace, and it's difficult to transact in this data in a transparent way. Mostly the space is full of companies that are putting a veneer on public data, but then charging exorbitant sums for that work. Weather data gets overwritten all the time, so no immutable record. That's a big problem if you are building things like financial applications on it. Like an example would be Arbol writes a contract on rainfall, pays the farmer if rainfall is low. If that's not immutable data, that's going to be a problem when we come to settle that contract. And finally, there's a general lack of incentive for innovation because there are very few monetary, value systems set up in the space. An example would be, most of the sensors are run by governments. Why? Because there's no real incentive to deploy sensors at scale. Now there are startups coming in that, but with blockchain and the power of crowdsourcing, you can scale that up much, much more. And that's just one of many problems you can solve in climate using decentralization. Our baseline product is the marketplace, and this is to allow somebody to have a clean, usable interface and a backend system that gives them clean data that can be used for everything from building their own apps to running financial applications like insurance. And the idea is for many of these data sets, if you go to the source, you have to download gigabytes, sometimes terabytes of data, and then parse it yourself. All of that will be easily done on dClimate, and you don't need to do any of that work. So it really starts to free up. If you talk to almost any climate startup, they almost often spend like 6 months to a year just cleaning data. So this is the baseline, and it allows a lot of stuff is free, and it allows other companies that are looking for clients to have a place they can get clients, which is a very difficult and expensive process in this space, client acquisition. On top of the marketplace is where the real power of dClimate comes. That's the ecosystem of apps. The idea is that your data, raw data, is only so useful. At the end of the day, you need actionable intelligence to convert that data into insights. And I'll give 2 examples of this shortly, but there's a number of different apps, and it's a very vibrant community building all sorts of interesting apps in the climate space. And I encourage anyone here building apps that use climate data to come talk to us and use it for your own. So one example is CYCLOPS, which is monitoring forestry assets on chain. So our community built this, and it is hitting the relative error rates that the European Space Agency targets as their holy grail, so to speak. The idea is that it's using a huge amount of satellite data as well as machine learning models, different bands from different satellites, to assess the health of a forest. The need for this is urgent because most of the forest monitoring space still relies on on-the-ground measurements. And most places in the world where you have forests you want to really protect urgently aren't places you can send people easily to verify. This would be the Congo Basin, this would be remote parts of the Amazon. And so you're not going to be able to solve the issues around carbon offsets, or you're not going to be able to solve the issues around deforestation if you can't even measure at scale. And so this is going to be open source, on-chain, verifiable, auditable, and again, the idea is to convert huge amounts of satellite data into something actionable that is on an open source system. The infrastructure on this is relatively involved, but you can basically see the flow going from Chainlink, Polygon, and Filecoin at the bottom, taking the satellite image and running CYCLOPS, the model, through Chainlink adapters and putting it on Polygon. We will talk more about this at future events, but CYCLOPS underpins a much more sort of involved carbon offset rethink that we are doing in conjunction with countries to pay them to avoid deforestation. And you cannot have a system like that until you can monitor in a transparent and accurate way. When you compare it to Vera, which is the industry standard, they can take 5 to 10 years to verify. There's no scale in that process. It still relies on boots on the ground. It is not relying on cutting edge advances that we have had in both satellites and machine learning. And it's closed source, and that's a problem. It's difficult to verify what Vera itself is doing. It's often very, very opaque. And if you want to build trust in a carbon offset market, you're not going to do it by having closed source models that some guys in the back room only know how it works. And the idea is that for us, we're not looking to replace Vera. They are welcome to use products like CYCLOPS to improve their own verification. And we have a lot of forestry projects around the world who may not be able to afford the time and the expense of a Vera verification, and they may not need it, but they need to still verify their own projects. And so that's where we see big demand and big sort of need for CYCLOPS in different parts of the world. So CYCLOPS was one example of converting data into actionable intelligence to monitor forests via large amounts of satellite data, imagery. The other app I want to show is Espresso, which is for our coffee clients. And why did we pick these two? The idea is to show the variety. These are just two of many apps that are and will be coming on dClimate. But the idea is that different sources of data, when overlaid with analysis and understanding, lead to very different applications. So Espresso is for the coffee market. Coffee is a complex tree. It is it's I think the second largest commodity by value after oil. It touches on a large portion of the world. It is the chief income source for millions of people. And the problem with coffee is that it is a very, very finicky plant when it comes to weather. I traded it for a long time, and it was an extremely stressful market to trade. because every single weather event has a massive impact on prices. The same weather that's good in one part of the season is not good in another part of the season. So with all these different stages, it is very difficult to make sense of how the crop is doing. And add to that, you can see the dots, the extreme geographical spread, as well as, it's grown in areas that have poor quality data to begin with. There is a very strong need by both producers, importers, exporters, traders, to understand how the crop is doing in each part of the world. And so the Espresso's job, if you will, is to convert the large amounts of weather and climate data, as well as yield data that we have on dClimate, into actionable intelligence for the coffee market. To see, okay, based on these weather patterns, what is the yield looking like based on historical relationships? You can highlight different areas, you can see different regions and subregions, and this helps you make sense of rainfall, heat data, and all these other data sets into what the crop is looking like. And this is very important, whether you're a producer at a local level or you're an importer in Europe and you import from 6 different countries. So, that was the idea behind showcasing these 2 very disparate apps. If you look at, what dClimate is, supporting, the first was always insurance, Arbol. Arbol, in the last 2 years has gone from doing 15 million in risk to probably in the $500 to $1 billion of risk this year. This is climate insurance across agriculture, energy, and many other asset classes, and dClimate helps to process and settle all that data. There are other insurers now looking to use that same infrastructure to settle their contracts. You have measurement and monitoring in carbon markets. CYCLOPS is for forestry. dClimate is involved in a number of other projects in carbon, including green hydrogen. And with every single sub-item, the goal is to bring transparency into this market, to remove the entities that have been there just due to legacy. It's time for a change in many aspects of climate, and carbon is no exception. And a third group of apps is catastrophe models. So I showed you guys Espresso. These are for specific industries. So Espresso is for coffee. Worksite is for construction. If you're a construction site manager, you are constantly facing weather-driven shutdowns due to regulatory or safety issues. If you have a number of sites, how many days of work do you expect to lose? That's analytics that is difficult for a construction company to obviously build internally, but also not particularly easily available on the internet. And so if you are building anything around climate, please reach out to us. We'd love to support you, and we give out grants as well. And we want a very healthy ecosystem of apps that help consumers from retail to industry make sense of the climate. I think that's all from me.